Well, hey everyone, welcome back to What's Got You Thinking. For those of you that haven't joined us before, the idea of these little interviews is that we talk to leaders about things that God is using to rattle ideas around in their head or stir them on to action or something like that. And the hope is to kind of replicate those around the table coffee conversations where you weren't necessarily looking for a resource, but you hear something and you go, oh, I need that. So grab a cup of coffee and listen in on this conversation, and I'm sure you'll pick something out of this. Joining me today, I'm going to let him introduce himself, is my friend Jason. Hey, Jason.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jason Tripp in Sudbury, Ontario, where I'm the lead pastor of Valley View Community Church. Enjoying a nice little fall season here before the reality of winter hits earlier than most places in Canada, maybe. But it's good to be here with you today, Mark.
Thanks for being here. Now, there's sort of some visual cues around you about what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, so I'm going to be talking a little bit about some movies that not only have me thinking but feeling. And these are not the three movies I'm going to be plugging today, but I'm going to not so subtly promote them in my decor in my basement here. So speaking of my basement, one thing in hindsight was a good idea. It was right before the pandemic started. We did a little basement renovation and turned our basement into a little home movie theater where we've enjoyed some family time and enjoying films. And I grew up in a family that a conservative Christian evangelical family, but for some reason movies weren't out of bounds. So from a young age, movies were really impactful and a part of my family upbringing. And so now I'm sharing in movie viewing and reflection with my family. And so I spent a lot of time in my basement during lockdowns watching films, and not just for entertainment purposes, but films that really get me thinking and feeling and connecting with life and faith. And so I want to share three of those movies today, but there's a quote that I want to share, just to sort of prime the pump today, by the late, great film critic Roger Ebert. Most people, even if you have a nominal interest in movies, you might remember Siskel and Ebert, thumbs up, thumbs down. Well, Ebert has said that if I have a criterion for choosing the greatest films, he says it's an emotional one. These are films that move me deeply one way or another. The cinema is the greatest art form ever conceived for generating emotions in its audience, and that's what it does best. And that's been my experience my whole life. And there's three movies in particular that have had that effect on me. They weren't just entertaining, but they left me sort of processing, contemplating, talking with my family, members of my faith community, about how they sort of intersect with the life and faith. And so I want to talk about three of those films.
Okay, so just before you jump into that, let's just slow down a little bit, because often what we talk about on this What's Got You Thinking is people recommend books and that. And I know you're a reader and you like books, but what we're talking, but movies touch a different part of us than a book does. Yeah. And I've heard you refer to these as a means of grace for you, movies. And so we're not just talking about these are good movies for sermon illustrations. So just slow down and talk to us a little bit about sort of the means of grace aspect of movies.
Yeah, absolutely. I would, when we talk about the typical Wesleyan means of grace, obviously TV and film and movies, that wasn't on Wesley's radar, but that's not an exhaustive list. And for me, art in all of its forms has the potential to touch some deep places in our heart, in our soul, in our mind. And for me, echoing that quote from Ebert, these aren't movies that I'm necessarily watching, taking notes for Sunday morning. They're movies I'm watching and experiencing. These are actual experiences that I've had that have helped me take and process my own life, my own relationships. These are movies that had me thinking days, weeks, months after viewing them in some cases. So they're means of grace. They help me connect and sort of process some of my own emotions, some of my own joys and pains. And especially in a season where the whole world is very disoriented, we're feeling anxious and on edge. Movies have been very cathartic for me, help me sort of connect with how I'm feeling. And so when I go to my meetings with my accountability partner, sometimes we have these conversations. What have we been watching or thinking? How is it connecting to life or with my own family? One of these films I processed on the drive home with my wife. And so these are not simply recommended to watch, but I think these movies, if you're open, the Spirit might use these and other films to sort of help you process and contemplate sort of the bigger questions of life.
And I think that's an important distinction. We're not just talking about killing a couple hours and eating some popcorn. We're talking about something that's gonna do what we hope all these resources do, and that if we're open, God can use to rattle some stuff around in us. And
yeah, now I must confess that much popcorn and chips have been consumed in my basement theater last year, maybe too much. But yeah, these are not simply checking out for 2 hours, but actually pressing in for 2 hours or less in the case of these films.
I think that's an important distinction. For just, we're not just saying, hey, this is good entertainment for a couple of hours, but what we're talking about today is actually geared for people who want to use, as you say, art to press in and
Yes.
explore some things.
Yes, these are not MCU movies. As much as I like those have a place, but these are a little more independent films that are creative, innovative, and sort of existential, I guess is the correct word.
Okay. So you said you had 3 for us. So why don't you go ahead and start?
Yeah, so I'll share these. These are the order in which I view these films in this calendar year. And I'll start with the first film that I would categorize as a great film for those regions, the emotional connection, as well as everything else you're looking for on cinema. I look for, performances and the visual and the auditory. I mean, it checks all those boxes. Is a movie that really came out of nowhere. It's a movie called simply Pig, and it's starring Nicolas Cage, which, if you know his sort of trajectory as an actor, it's been interesting to see his journey in films. He's made a lot of terrible movies in recent years, but he's made a lot of great movies over the years. And I will say, though, one thing with all 3 of these movies, before I get into this one, is they're all directed by first-time movie directors, which I find very interesting. We're in a season where, in our denomination, we're talking about innovation and being creative and taking a look at things. Well, here are 3 directors who are doing something creative and innovative. So the director is Michael Sarnowski. It stars Nicolas Cage. And the synopsis is as simple as, Nicolas Cage is living a reclusive life alone in the Oregon wilderness. He's a truffle hunter. Basically, he lives with his beloved truffle pig, and they're out foraging for truffles. If you're not familiar with what truffles are, they're a highly sought after delicacy in high-end restaurants. And that's the setting in the Northeast and Portland area. And basically, early on in the film, he only interacts with one person. This guy drives in once a week in a yellow Camaro, drops off some food, supplies for him to live in this reclusive forest little shanty he lives in exchange for the truffles that he's collected. And I won't spoil any of these movies, but basically his beloved pig gets kidnapped, gets stolen, and the rest of the movie, he actually has to leave his little reclusive forest area. He wanders back into Portland to search for his pig. Now, when I read the synopsis for this, I'm thinking, okay, this is going to be like another violent vengeance film like John Wick with Keanu Reeves or Taken with Liam Neeson. But it's totally subverts the vengeance film genre, which I appreciated. It's really an anti-violent vengeance film. And as he's wandering into town and as he's sort of facing his own past, because as you find out in the movie, he was a somebody in the restaurant industry in Portland, he's dealing with his own demons, his own grief and loss. But he's also I was thinking as I left the theater, this is like a John the Baptist character. Here he is wandering out of his wilderness, and he's upsetting and challenging the powers that be, the principalities and powers, and those that are, chasing, the big corporate life in the restaurant industry. And so it's fascinating. He's disheveled, he's dirty, he's got a long beard, he's bloody, but it's not bloody from him beating people up, from taking a beating. So there's something to be said about the use of nonviolence and overcoming the violence and the principalities and powers of the world. It's not an overtly sort of Christian message per se, but there's a lot underneath the surface in this simple premise. And the relationship between him and the owner of this yellow Camaro that is his only point of contact with the outside world. It's a man by the name of Amir, played by Alex Wolff. It's sort of a clash of 2 worlds. He's the quintessential sort of young person walking in the shadow of his father, who's a somebody in town and trying to find his identity. He's got the fast car, listening to the classical music. So he's drinking the Kool-Aid of what the world says identity and success is. And it's kind of beautiful to see his interaction and friendship with Nicolas Cage, who's been there, done that, been wounded, and is now trying to heal and go on a different trajectory in his life. And so you see this clash of ideologies between Nicolas Cage's character and the power structures of the world, all in this interesting context of the Portland restaurant scene. And it's an hour and a half movie. It's lean and it's very engaging. It does have some foul language and some violence, but by Hollywood standards, it's pretty tame. And it's called Pig, and I highly recommend it. I've seen it 3 times in theaters. That's the only movie I've seen 3 times, and it's been sticking with me for the last few months since I saw it.
Good. I was going to say you'll sort of give us just understanding that not everyone's idea of what to view is the same. You'll give us a little kind of like, this has a little bit of this or a little bit of swearing or violence or whatever in it.
Yeah, like coming out of the movie, I didn't know the rating going in. I thought, okay, this is definitely PG-13. It is rated R. Basically, there's one scene of moderate violence and there's a little bit of profanity, but it doesn't seem forced or out of place. It seems natural given the story. And so take that for what it's worth. I know everybody will have different ideas of what movies to watch and what movies to pass on.
Good. Fair enough. Thank you. So that's the first one, Pig.
That's Pig. That's the first one. The second movie is probably the most difficult to explain because this, more so than the other two, is one that you really have to view, and you don't just view it, you actually experience it. It's called 9 Days. 9 Days. Again, it's probably a film maybe most haven't even heard of. It's an independent film, again, by a first-time director by the name of Edson Oda. It really is an existential movie. I think the easiest way I can explain the synopsis is to compare and contrast this film with one that maybe many will be familiar with, the one that won the best animated movie of the year last year, movie by the name of Soul, the latest Pixar movie. Yep. In which Soul, the jazz musician protagonist, he dies and he goes to sort of this great beyond, and part of the movie is in this sort of afterlife, and he's able to come back and sort of change the trajectory of his life. Well, imagine our protagonist in that doesn't die, go to the great after, and then come back to Earth. But our protagonist in this movie is a man named Will, played by Winston Duke. And in the movie, much like Nicolas Cage in Pig, he is in a reclusive setting. The movie starts, there's just one simple house in this vast wilderness. And you see this man, Will, and it's sort of archaic. He's got these VHS videotapes and he's got a room full of TV screens, and he's just sitting most of the day watching these TV screens and recording. And it's kind of strange. At the outset, you don't really know what's happening, but it's interesting. And you find out, midway or early on through the movie, that Winston Duke is living in this world, not a world of what we might call purgatory, but let's call it sort of pregatory, the world before life. And basically his role, having lived a life, and now this is kind of his afterlife job description, is he's tasked with interviewing potential candidates for the opportunity to live a human life. And each TV screen in his house is someone that he has picked previously, and he's watching their first person point of view as they're living their life in real time. He's watching their life and their experiences, good, bad, and ugly. And this is how he spends most of his days, except when one person's screen goes blank, that means they have died, and he's now tasked with interviewing another crop of individuals to potentially become humans, to live a life. And so early on in the film, one of the people he's handpicked previously dies, and then people start knocking at his door. They're adults like us, but they're a little quirky, they're a little off, because they're meant to be playing roles of souls who are pre-born. They haven't experienced life yet. And so they're interacting with him, they're interacting with each other, they're watching these TV screens, taking notes, trying to ascertain what is life like. There's a series of interview questions and challenges. It's almost like watching an episode of Survivor in a sense, but it's, and they get trimmed down. People, unfortunately, are asked to leave. But Will, the key character, the interviewer, it really is about him, because as he's interviewing throughout the movie, you're getting hints and snippets of his past, when he lived a life, some of the pain and shame that he's carrying from his real life, which is informing how he's choosing people going forward. And so it's a very innovative sort of creative take. It's not a movie that really has anything new to say that other movies haven't, but the medium in which it's done is very unique. I found myself in tears start to finish in this movie. Now, I am a feeler, so that's sometimes par for the course. But this one, more than any I've seen in years, really hit some deep places to the point where I really had to kind of process with my wife and others, why am I feeling this way? Why? And the final scene, just they had to clean up aisle E, seat 12. There was a big puddle under the seat at the end of the movie. So it's a fantastic movie. It's deeply moving. It really is a meditation on what it means to be human and to live a life fully alive and flourishing, and not to take the things we sometimes take for granted, which really is a good message for coming through this pandemic, right? The things that we tend to take for granted, the simple experiences. It really presses into that. And it's also a powerful reminder of our need for human connection, for healing and wholeness of past hurts and wounds. And so that's 9 days. It's the best I can explain it, but really you got to see it and experience this one. This is the one I saw most recently. And again, speaking of healing and wholeness from past hurts and wounds, this one is a bit of a gut punch. It's maybe the toughest of the three to watch, but very important as well. And it's a movie called Mass, Mass. And I saw this movie just a couple of weeks ago at our sort of local film festival here. The premise is very simple. It's a very minimalistic movie. 95% of the film takes place in a church basement, an Episcopal church in the States, between four individuals, two couples. And mass, if you look up mass in the dictionary, it could mean a measure of weight. It could mean like a church mass, or it could mean in the context of like a mass gathering or mass shooting. Well, the title suggests all three of those meanings. This is a weighty topic. It's almost like a mass because it takes place in a church basement around a table with four individuals. And the four individuals, two of them are parents of a victim in a mass school shooting, and two of them are the parents of the perpetrator who killed others and himself. And it takes place, I think, 5 or 6 years after that tragic event. And this church has facilitated a safe place, a hospitable place. There's a message, right? Where enemies, victim and victimizer can come together to try and find a measure of healing and wholeness moving forward. And that's it. It's basically four people in a room talking for the whole movie, but it is so powerful. You feel like you're literally a fly on the wall to this conversation, and it feels real. It doesn't feel forced. It doesn't feel over the top. The conversations feel like these four individuals actually have endured. You forget that this is a movie. You think it's a documentary because the performances are so on point. So for those of you keeping score with names and actors, so you got Jason Isaacs and Martha Plumpton are the father and mother of one of the victims, and Reed Birney and Ann Dowd are the parents of the victimizer. And it's beautiful because it's not full of cliches. Some movies, it's all cliches and tropes and happy ending. And so this, you see an arc. The arc in the conversations are moving towards wholeness, towards forgiveness and healing. But it takes 2 hours to get there. So there's some anger, there's some pain, there's some resentment, there's some mistrust, and all of that comes out over 2 hours in this conversation. And the fact it takes place in a church basement, I found that very fitting, right? Because what is a church? It shouldn't be a bricks and mortar. It should be a people of God, a place where we can facilitate the healing in close proximity. And Jesus, one of his core messages is love not only for those who look, think, and act like us, but love our, quote, enemies, right? And this movie really depicts with power how that can happen. Again, first-time director by the name of Fran Kranz, 2 hours long. There's no violence per se. There's a little bit of foul language, but it seems real because they've been holding on to this pain and shame. I mean, the parents of the victimizer, certainly they've been ostracized in the community. And so this is all too real. And I left thinking of this, not only in that specific context, but I left thinking, how we're living in these polarized times, right? And we're having even polarized conversations in the life of our church, and how it's so easy to caricature the person on the other side, right? So even in our movement right now with the LGBTQ plus conversation we're pressing into, it's right, recognizing that, not all people who sort of lean towards a more traditional stance are bigots, and not everybody who might lean a little more towards affirming don't take the Bible seriously, right? And it's just getting away from caricaturing the other. And this movie really brings that to the forefront in the context of this mass shooting. So it's called Mass. Highly recommended, along with the other two.
Okay. So a couple of questions. Obviously, these are, like you said, you're a feeler, and so this is going to stir things up. But also, I know you're a thinker, and it stirs things up there. So it seems like this would be best to sort of take in and then process somehow, either with God or in a journal, or you say you talk to people about it. So is that true?
Yeah. For me, it's the four things. Like, does this movie touch my mind, my heart, eyes, and ears? So all four of those, right? What am I seeing? What am I hearing? What am I thinking? And what am I feeling? And absolutely, this is, there's a time and a place, depending if you're introvert or extrovert. I'm an extrovert, but I'm finding more and more the need to internally process things. So the reality is, all three of these movies, the first time I saw them, I wasn't with anyone in the theater. I mean, there were others in the theater, but I'm one of those movie nerds that I'll go to a theater alone on my day off. And that's part of, I know it's going to be a means of grace. And so oftentimes I'll see it and process it, but then I'll either tap someone on the shoulder, hey, let's watch this movie together, or I'll share with, I have certain people that I'll go see films with, my wife and a few friends in town. And so to me, there's multiple levels. There's that personal processing, contemplation, maybe prayer is involved in that. And then also, whether it's an accountability partner, if I'm really struggling with, hey, this unlocks something in me, someone to come along and process, or even a small group. I know small groups in the church sometimes that they'll go on movie outings, and that'll be their means of getting out, but also how these connect to our group and our life and our neighborhood. So absolutely, I think all three of these deserve being discussed in community as well as processing personally.
Good. The other thing I was going to ask was, these probably aren't playing at the Cineplex right now.
Sadly, no. Yeah.
Any clues on where you said one was just at a film festival, so we might have to wait a little bit for that, but just on streaming services, or?
Right. So I don't think any of these are on like your Netflix or any Amazon Prime streaming services as of yet. I know Pig, because that one came out early in the year. You can rent that, YouTube, Apple. So that one's available for a few bucks to rent. And 9 Days and Mass, if you have any sort of indie movie theaters, any non sort of big Cineplex theaters in your city or within driving distance, you might want to keep your eyes open there. They've done the festival circuit, and they're coming to some of those theaters. That's where I saw all three at a local indie theater here. Of course, they will be coming to streaming services or available for rental probably in the next few months. Usually it takes about 3 months after they do the circuit, they're available. So keep your eyes open, and they'll be available down the road pretty soon.
Sure. Well, thanks for sharing those ones that have impacted you. But I also know movies help you and your church make a connection with the community. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and this is an opportunity to plug our life plan process. We've done life plan, 3 times in my tenure. We're about to ramp up our 4th time through in the last sort of 12 years. And the very first time I facilitated a life plan, very poorly, I might add. But so God honors our poor efforts, even if our hearts are in the right place. And out of our first life plan at Valley View Church, this is going back 11 years now, the number one thing that came out of our dream session is to chase the construction of a community drive-in movie theater. We have a good-sized property that can accommodate a lot of vehicles. And so for the last 11 summers, we have been offering sort of free Friday night community drive-in movies. And that's really been our big summer sort of community connection point. A lot of people in the community know us as the movie church. And so that's you see the same people over and over. And that's led to, relationships and, people attending the church and people asking for prayer, but just being that presence in the community. And that's not necessarily these are the movies we would be sharing with the community. It's mostly sort of the family friendly sort of Disney movies or other movies, but it's been great to see, and people that really can't afford to go to the movie theater. It's not cheap for a night out, so keeping it free and just saying, hey, we're a church that wants to make a meaningful and connection to the community with no strings attached. That's what this has been. And so God sort of honored our life plan journey, and that's been humming along for the last decade plus.
And you were able to do that even sort of during some of the lockdown times, and I'm sure that was
Yeah,
pretty
that's the nice thing with drive-in, right? You stay in your car. So even last summer when we were in the midst of it, and this summer we were able to host that. And last summer in particular, we had huge crowds, our biggest ever. We did say you got to stay in your vehicles here, just tune in your radio, but people were just itching to get out to do something, and we were able to sort of provide that. So it's great seeing grandparents and parents and kids, and a lot of what I hear is, oh, when I was a kid I used to go to the drive-in, right? And so the next generation is getting to experience something that the parents and the grandparents did. So it's been a good sort of intergenerational ministry in the community.
Great. No, it's been good, and it's been fun to hear you talk about that over the years. So one last thing, like I said, a lot of times people get books that they're recommended, and I think this has been good to help us think of other ways that we can think and process ideas and let God speak to us. And obviously you're very passionate about this. Is this the kind of thing you talk about on your YouTube channel?
Yeah,
quite a bit.
So I mentioned, these three directors are innovative first-time directors. So about 6 months ago, during the latest lockdown, I was sort of restless. I know myself well enough. When I get restless, I feel this need to sort of create something or innovate. That's kind of how I'm wired. And so I thought, well, maybe I'm stuck at home, but I can at least share some of my passions with anybody listening out there in YouTube land. I was very hesitant for years to be kind of that guy on a screen. I much prefer face-to-face interaction, but that wasn't possible. So I somewhat begrudgingly at first, but I've been enjoying it lately. I started a YouTube channel. And so I called the YouTube channel Trip Advisor with 2 P's. My last name is Tripp. So the real Trip Advisor hasn't sued me anything for copyright infringement there. So yeah, it's a YouTube channel called Trip Advisor, and periodically I'll produce videos related to 3 topics or themes I'm passionate about. Certainly movies. So occasionally I'll have a Film Friday video, just like today, a movie review or talking about movies, what movies mean to me. On Tuesdays, another one of my hobby, as you know, and maybe many others know, I love board games. That's another thing since my childhood I've enjoyed. So I'll do some Tabletop Tuesday, just basic board game reviews and tutorials. It's a good activity around shared tables that we can continue to do during lockdowns. And then, of course, as a pastor who likes to think about theology, sometimes I'll do Theology Thursday videos, where specific audience there is those that are maybe sort of unraveling, deconstructing their faith and looking for a faith that's more Christ-centered. That maybe they have left a toxic church experience, or they're in the church, but they're wrestling with sort of anxiety and doubt. Those are the people that I generally find myself in a lot of conversation with. And so some theological conversations that try and recenter Christ and the beautiful gospel. So those are the 3 topics. You won't have 3 a week, but periodically I've probably got 12 to 15 for each of those topics up on YouTube. You can find me there, subscribe if you want, Trip Advisor.
Great. So if people want more of what you gave them a taste of today, that's one thing. Or if they're looking for new board games, which I know lots of people are too. And so great. Thanks, Jason, for sharing those with us. Thanks for helping us stretch a little bit in thinking in terms of maybe mediums that God can use to rattle some stuff around in us. I know I'm often tempted to think of movies as just a way to kill a couple hours, but I think it's important to see, as you said, art as a way of opening ourselves up and letting God speak to us. So I appreciate you taking the time today. Thanks everyone for watching, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Thanks, Mark.